I had the pleasure to introduce our chairman, Paul Jones, and next I'm going to introduce our vice chairman, Greg Hummel. And like Paul, Greg has been involved really from the very, very beginning. In fact, when the OECD report was published, we sat in the conference room of what was then Bryan Cave and talked about the need to create the Alliance for Regional Development. So Greg is one of the founders of the Alliance, and Shalora and I are very fortunate to office out of what is now Bryan Cave Payton Leisner. They recently merged with a London firm and have offices all over the world. But I can say for the 6 years that I have been fortunate to office with Greg, and there's a great team, it's a wonderful place. We have so much support. And Greg, again, we really appreciate the opportunity to go to work every day at Bryan Cave Payton Leisner and to work so closely with you. So thank you for all of your support. And if we could get a round of applause, please, for Greg Hummel.
Thank you, Kelly. We've been focused on the Midwest, certainly Wisconsin and the rest of the region. This organization started with a territorial review, actually the first one that was conducted by the OECD in the United States. And we're privileged to have Karen McGuire from the OECD, who flew in yesterday, to address us on the subject of global trends, local actions, maintaining a competitive mega region. Karen is no stranger to Chicago. She took her degree from the University of Chicago, went on to Harvard's Kennedy School, then had a stint as an investment banker at UBS, also time with the Urban Institute in Washington. And then she pivoted into really important work at the OECD. She's an author. She's written books and articles, Regions and Innovation Policy, Collaborating Across Borders, Competitive Regional Clusters, National Policy Approaches. Today, she's the senior counselor in OECD's Center for Entrepreneurship. And so without further ado, Karen, welcome to our podium.
Thank you very much for welcoming me here today, and thanks again to the Alliance for Regional Development and the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago for putting together such a great event and for allowing us to participate with you here today. I just wanted to share a couple of reflections on some global trends, particularly for large regions that have a strong metropolitan pole within them, and a little bit about some considerations regarding its global positioning in terms of rankings in other OECD metro regions, and some ideas about the future of work to feed into some of the next discussions we'll be having on skills. You know, the other thing is that being here today, it's an opportunity to take back some very exciting examples that we can share in our OECD work on what's happening here in this mega region to help others. So what is the OECD? So the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development works with its 36 member countries that are in green up here, and also engages with 120 overall. And its origins were in the Marshall Fund in the reconstruction of Europe, and today it's really a global hub for thinking about different policies, for internationally comparable statistics. If you've ever heard somebody say, oh, well, the US spends X percent of its GDP on healthcare versus France, it's probably coming from the OECD. We provide a lot of evidence-based analysis, and we promote international standards. And this goes into a wide range of topics. So if you're interested in global trade, last month's interim economic outlook, you can look up and get some of the latest there. On education policies, on all sorts of policies. So the things that we do at this Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions, and Cities is really to try and help provide data, internationally comparable data at the scale of regions. We also do certain types of reviews. Now, we've done dozens and dozens of what we call these territorial reviews at different scales: national, regional, some smaller metropolitan scales. And we also have networks of practice that we try to use as ways of sharing knowledge. The study that was mentioned, and I would not presume to resume it all, it's 314 pages, but the idea being that, we heard about these 4 areas that were a topic of the study on managing skills, innovation, entrepreneurship, transport, logistics, and green growth. We heard about that this morning with the president. Maybe just to highlight that a lot of what the study was trying to do was say that there's already so much here that the issue is really building, connecting, and marketing what is there, and that you really have a chance because you're lucky. I should say lucky, and I'm thinking in French. That's chance in French. That you're lucky because there is so much here. And so many other regions don't have that chance. And so it's really exciting to see all the people that are here today that are really dedicated to making this happen day in and day out. One thing that Kelly was asking about was on some of the other examples internationally. And, we have a lot of these business and civic leadership organizations internationally. Here's just a few, just as a reminder that there are potentially lots of things that the Alliance and other actors can do, and here's some of the actions here. We heard about housing as being an issue earlier in a couple different presentations. Well, London First is also first in housing there, so it's very expensive. So, these organizations that are thinking about what is important for its business development and how to link in the higher education institutions. And I think, the activities here really fit into this. And they bring something that a lot of other actors can help with, which is really this vision and these catalytic initiatives and the private sector know-how and the convening power. And I think the people here today is a testament to the convening power that these kinds of organizations that can have, and how they can help overcome, in a sense, sometimes the challenges that our public sector divides create when we're trying to promote this development. One of the other issues that we've been studying since the Chicago study has been how to support activities cross borders. Now, this was an example of a study that was done around international borders, but I think here sometimes it can be pretty hard to work even just across state lines. And, one of the things that is really a quick win, and I think we'll hear a little bit more about some of the analysis like in South Carolina, are trying to understand what are the cluster-related support for these common competencies across the mega region, how to prioritize a bit this joint research. And, these are things that tend in other international examples to be very effective and very, I would say, relatively easy to implement. Where it becomes a little bit harder is on the more broad-based university collaborations, where you have sometimes certain very formalized bodies that don't always last after certain public sector funding ends. And so really this bottom-up private sector initiatives that we're seeing here are really an example, because in a lot of other OECD countries, often the private sector isn't stepping up to the degree that they are here. Some of the challenges, and I highlight a little bit about branding issues on a sort of broader regional scale. How many people have heard of the Øresund? Okay, how many people have heard of Copenhagen? Okay, so this is one of the things that has come up in a lot of the work that we've been doing on these mega regions, and that is that it's always a sort of a political challenge between the tensions about how everyone is represented and then how do you get visibility internationally. And so I think that is an important issue that that's something that the actors here today can work on. But it's true that it's this common branding and an international scale and showing really the weight of the assets here is something that increasingly I think will help with the region's development. Just a few trends, big metropolitan areas have been really gaining in prominence within OECD countries. And these are countries that are already developed. I'm not talking about, developing countries. And what we're seeing here is that actually they're gaining population in general. They're gaining in economic significance in terms of the share of the national economies. They have higher rates, increasingly higher rates of firm creation and innovation. We're also seeing a lot of reurbanization in some terms of business locations in some cases. And also, in addition to these sort of suburban science parks, we're also seeing a bit of a movement towards more innovation districts. So the sort of city angle is very hot right now. And the data shows it across the OECD. We heard Dr. Wu this morning say that size doesn't matter. Well, for some things it does. And one of them is in terms of productivity statistics. And this is where you have opportunities without necessarily growing bigger, but being better connected. And this is what the economists like to call agglomeration benefits. But the fact that you have these better connections within the mega region are going to help boost those productivity figures. Now, proximity to cities and exposure to international competition are other drivers of these productivity increases. And one of the things I want to highlight here is the tradable sectors. We were just talking about global trade. And in this case, I'm saying anything that is exposed to trade. Doesn't mean you actually had to go international, but what you're producing is a good or services that is competitive on an international market if it had to be. And this is really where we're seeing a lot of the action in terms of the productivity growth. And in the cities, it's a lot of these knowledge-intensive services that fall into this category of tradable sectors that are driving a lot of what we're seeing in cities today. However, one of the challenges, and we've been doing some economic research about this since the study, is that actually when you have a lot of fragmentation of local governments in a particular district, you have some challenges and some penalties in terms of productivity and in terms of inclusion. And the statistics show that this creates some sort of bigger barriers to overcome. And that's one that is particularly challenging in the mega region, which in international comparison with the 3 states, at least 1,700 municipalities and even more with all the special purpose districts. It's a big challenge. One of the things in terms of the latest statistics, now I'm not going to presume to update the study here. We just looked at a little bit of the data, but just to say that over time, the mega region remains, big and it remains productive in terms of its levels of productivity. However, its growth is a little bit slower. Now, we don't necessarily expect all very large cities to grow at the fastest rates. Economic theory might predict that some of the smaller ones have more potential for catching up. However, we do see that, out of the 97 largest metropolitan areas, this mega region is a little bit slower on some of those growth figures. And to be honest, one of the big issues that really comes up as well is on issues related to the labor force, regarding how the labor force, what share of sort of the population that's eligible for working is working, what is sort of the growth there. And so you could sum this up a little bit to say that in recent years, some of this mega region's increasing productivity might not have come at the cost of inclusion. I see there's a little error there on the screen when the computer reads it, but Chicago is where the little arrow is. So it's just to show that if you put all the dots on a map, whether they're more or less inclusive in terms of labor force and higher or lower in terms of productivity, you get to see a little bit where Chicago fits in. And it's more in the category of becoming more productive, but not necessarily as inclusive. And I think we've heard a few of the talks this morning talk about how this is going to be, an ongoing challenge for the mega region. And so that's why I wanted to sort of make the transition between this presentation and the next discussion that's going to focus a bit more skills on the future of work, because this is, I think, another big challenge that the mega region will be looking forward to in the future. And one of the big tendencies we see is that with technological progress and digitalization, we do have some skills polarization. So basically in this chart you have the orange is the middle skills, And then you have dark blue and light blue for the high and low skilled. And the little green is where you've got the United States. But it's just to show that we do have this challenge to address in terms of where the jobs are on the skill spectrum and what that's going to mean for future workforce development issues. Now, the U.S. does a little bit better than many other OECD countries, but it's still an issue. The next thing that I wanted to highlight was just that we've been doing a lot of work on at the OECD on what's called the future of work, and a lot of others have produced estimates like McKinsey, et cetera, some academics. What the OECD has looked at, and they look at the occupations, and they look at the skills required, and they look at what's the likelihood that these skills will be automated. And overall in the US, it's about a 10% that are at very high risk of automation, between over 70%. And then around, so in the estimates for the US are 10% at high risk, 27 with significant change. This is a little bit lower than the OECD overall, but it just reinforces some of the messages that we've been hearing today about the need to prepare for quicker transitions. So, of course, this varies across regions. It varies across all sorts of places. This one was done at the state level, and you can see, where you've got the highest share and lowest share in a few countries. You've got, highest share is in Nevada, and the lowest shares in Delaware, but we took a look, and here, I guess the percents have trouble on the computer, but what we did was we took a look at the US metropolitan statistical areas, and we see that actually Chicago has a little bit of a higher share of its jobs at high risk, and that might be related to its manufacturing base, which just means that more work will need to be done to try and help those firms upgrade. So you have the region in the last couple of years is going on the right track in the sense that it's creating jobs that are less likely to be at risk in the future. So you kind of want to be in that dark blue bar, and it just means that Chicago has maybe a little bit more to work. The Chicagoland area, the mega region in a wider sense, that you need to think about that as the sort of cluster development, the supply chain development, and all these other projects are going forward. So the mega region will need to think about a lot of different types of policies. And, I think one of the things that the future of work will bring is trying to think about the regional labor market with a little bit of a new lens. Here we're talking about the risk of automation. There's all sorts of other information about the nature of work contracts that I won't get into here because that's related to a lot of regulatory differences, across countries and what gets qualified as non-standard work. But the fact that we have to think about how long the jobs that are being created will last, which was a question we had earlier, is going to be very important. We've heard a lot today about the role that the mega region can play in supporting this lifelong learning and the retraining in the programs to transition workers. And here, in terms of the entrepreneurship and SME support, I want to just highlight the importance of the sort of digitalization. And we heard earlier in the presentation about the automation in your firms, and how to support maybe those SMEs that are not as up to the curve and getting sensors into their conveyor belts, et cetera, as quickly, and what the region can do to help those SMEs, because we need to think about both sides of the coin, both the upgrading of the local firm base and the skills that they're going to need. So I just wanted to raise a few of these issues as a sort of follow-up, in a sense, to what we started in the study, because I think there's really a tremendous amount more that can be done to address some of the challenges that were raised in the study, and also to confront some of the newer challenges that we're all sort of focusing on today with this future of work. Alrighty, so what I'll say, I think we have to close soon here, but what I might want to just highlight is that if there are any areas where you think OECD research would be valuable for you, just feel free to come up and ask me, and I'd be happy to direct you to different parts of the OECD that have access.
Why don't we get a copy? I'd like to get a copy of your presentation.
Sure, I'm sure, Kelly, you'll be able to make available presentations afterwards.
The presentations will be available on the app.
Great, thank you. Very helpful information.
Okay.
We have time for just maybe one or two questions. Start over here.
Yes. Do you have any best practices in terms of the leveraging social innovation to help underrepresented groups? And the reason I ask that question is because in the mega region, that has to be something intentionally done. It can't be low on the priority list, and no region is going to be prosperous with underserved and minority groups not being able to participate holistically. And that's just a reality. So I'm looking for best practices because so far I don't know if we've done an adequate job in terms of articulating that in this particular region.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a couple of things, and and I can direct you to some work that colleagues are doing in this area. I mean, there are some examples that have worked with, populations that have particular physical handicaps, particular disadvantages in accessing the labor force. There have been work that they've done also on, for example, indigenous populations around the world. I think in the Chicago area, I don't know if you're referring to just traditionally those that are having trouble accessing the labor market, or if there are those that have, even been. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think in this case, given the ability to try some pilots, and one of the things that they have found is that if you make an effort to involve in the design of the projects the populations that you're most trying to serve, that has this co-creation of the programs has a huge impact in making them more effective and being able to scale up. But I'd be happy to give you some more details because I know we have several books on this topic for you.
I'd also like to point out, just because we need to move on to another question, but Steve Friedman, if you can raise your hand. Sir, if you could just try to meet with Steve Friedman. We're actually in conversations about launching something for 2019 in that space. We'd love for you to reconnect. Okay? And then we just need to go to question back there. And,
You had a number of slides that showed jobs at risk. Was there a correlation to unionization, or how did labor unions correlate with the percentage of jobs at risk of automation?
To be honest, this is focused on skill sets associated with particular occupations. So I'm not aware that they have correlated that with union participation. However, there has been some work on some of the non-standard work contracts where there is some looking, it's not union participation, but in terms of the dynamism of the labor market. And then in some of the labor markets where there is a bit of less dynamism, there is in some of those markets more active use of certain forms of non-standard work contracts. But it's a different issue than the automation risk itself, which is related to the actual skills associated with a particular job.
one question.
One, I guess it'll be the final question for this session, but you mentioned some of the cross-border issues. I would speculate that in some ways our cross-border issues are worse than some of the international cross-border issues. Do you have any thoughts on A, what the impact of that has been to perhaps make people aware of how serious a problem it is, and B, ways to break it down?
Well, I guess that's sort of the big question, huh? That's the purpose of having the Alliance and others here. I think the figures have shown that there is this productivity penalty, and it's quantified as being 6% for a doubling of the number of jurisdictions. So if one wanted to, we could try to do some back of the envelope calculations and try to say if, when you're controlling for other factors and you have this doubling in the number of jurisdictions, that you can see what that productivity penalty might be, and that could be one potential metric you could consider. The challenges that people were raising, there were some discussions at dinner side about what are the kind of events that get people mobilized and get people to the table. And we heard the example of Foxconn, where basically that just accelerated a huge number of initiatives because there was a catalytic event. And it's hard to get that to get everyone to coalesce. But I think the kinds of projects that you try to create to make that visibility is going to be the most important, because it's, the report already came out and said, much more needs to be done to reduce the sort of within mega region zero-sum game kind of competition for the region to grow. And, I think that that maybe that'll be part of the work in the future program of the Alliance and others, to try and identify what are those catalytic projects that will inspire and give a sense of urgency. So.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, that was great.
Karen held up that big book with over 300 pages. If you're interested, a link to the book is on the Alliance website, as is the synopsis, which is about 23 pages. So if you want to make yourself familiar with the important messages that the OECD brought to this region, please be sure to check the Alliance website. So now we're going to break for lunch. And of course, we want to pack so much into today. So as soon as you're able to get your plate, come back in, we're going to kick off with our lunch program in about 15 minutes or so. So please, the buffet is right out the doors, and we'll see you back here in about 15 minutes. Thank you.